I am excited and passionate to talk about. A lot of our families and children that we see here in our practice have a lot of these issues. So we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety in kiddos and teens and sort of what to look for. My experience and background comes from a variety of places. I actually started in my undergraduate through adoption. I did a lot of work with families that have gone through adoption either themselves or had adopted kiddos. So I have a lot of experience and training in that area. I've also worked at the Children's Advocacy Center with varieties of abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, those kinds of things. And I also worked at the Children's Hospital here in Plano in their eating disorder unit. So I have some experience there as well, in addition to a wide variety of general other concerns and mainly anxiety. We see this a lot. And so I just want to be able to give you guys an overview and how to help know the difference between what's really a clinical significant concern and what's kind of normal. And so kind of help you guys differentiate between the two of those things. But first, I kind of want to get started with Calvin's day. So put your brains kind of back in your kiddo's day and thinking about where they are. So this is one of my favorite comics about Calvin's day. His mom shouts from up the stairs, "Get up, Calvin, I'm not going to call you again." He mumbles and groans, "Yeah, I bet. You're going to miss the bus. Now get out of bed." Now he's in math. "You don't know the answer, then sit down." Oh gosh, and here comes the bully. "Hey, Twinkie, you want to see if there's an afterlife?" Okay, he's finally back home. "No, you can't go until you finish your homework. Just eat your food, you don't need to play with it. Stop stalling and get in the bathtub." "No, you can't stay up a little longer, go to bed." There he climbs back into his bed. Mom comes in. "Have a good night's sleep, tomorrow's another big day." Oh, sigh. So there's a lot of different things that go on in a kiddo's day-to-day life that maybe we're not really aware of. And it's a nice reminder to know that kids go through a lot throughout their day. And sometimes as parents and adults, we don't really see that. And so it's hard to know where they come from and what's going on. And sometimes as parents, it's hard to know how to help, especially if they're not coming home and talking to you about it. So today's topic is anxiety. So what really is anxiety? General definition here. So a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. I think it's probably true to say that we could all feel that at times. And that's probably the broadest general definition of anxiety there is. And it's also important to know that a certain level of kind of worry and anxiety, it really helps us stay alert and aware. It makes us make decisions, makes choices, keeps us from running into a street when a car is there. So there's some differences there, but also knowing that when it becomes excessive is when it impacts daily functioning, and that's where an anxiety disorder might emerge. And so we're going to talk about some of those things. And so when is it a problem? Charlie Brown here lets us know that it can start for just an ordinary day-to-day situation. Why can't I eat lunch with that little red hair girl? Then I'd be happy. I don't know how many of you know about Charlie Brown and his obsession over the little red-haired girl, right? But then that can turn into some other things. And so if he's feeling that way at first, then the excessive thought comes into, rats, nobody's ever going to like me. And so that's where it starts to trickle down and have that snowball effect. And then it will begin to affect daily life. So lunch hour is the loneliest hour of the day. Maybe he starts to avoid going to lunch because of all of these precursor events that have happened. So we're going to talk about the differences between when anxiety is kind of normal and when it turns into that excessive, begins to affect everyday life. So some anxiety disorders. Generalized anxiety is probably the most common anxiety disorder that's out there. Social anxiety, separation anxiety. I think we hear a lot about separation anxiety when kiddos are little. Selective mutism comes up a little bit. Panic disorder is another one. Always there's phobias, there's fears of different things. And OCD, the obsession compulsive disorder. OCD is a little bit tricky because there's a lot of criteria. So a lot of us think of OCD as, oh, you're just really particular and you have to have things done a certain way. And that's really hard, but really there's an obsessive part and there's a compulsive part. And so those two things together make up that criteria for that particular disorder. I think a lot of our teenagers, we hear them say flippantly, like, oh, you're so OCD. But it really is a real disorder that does exist. And it is quite complex. And so just knowing that these are some different disorders that are out there that fall under the umbrella of anxiety. I love, obviously, here's Charlie Brown again, where he says, you look kind of depressed, Charlie Brown. Like, oh, I worry about school a lot. I also worry about my worries so much about school. Think my anxieties have anxieties. So again, you see that trickle down effect of when it starts to affect that daily life. Poor Charlie Brown, he has a really hard life. So we'll go through some of those things. Something to notice here is I talked about anxiety disorders and social anxiety disorders. I am not going to get into the differences between all of the subsets of anxiety today. That's not my goal. My goal today is to help you guys better understand kind of general anxiety and to kind of know how to pick up the red flags and the symptoms for that and what to do and how you can help your kiddos. So I'm not going to dive into the heaviness of all of the different things, but I will touch on just a few of them so you have a basic understanding of some of that, and then we'll kind of move on. So this one right here, I bring this up because the separation anxiety disorder and specific phobias, the average age of onset is really not until 11. So as kids are really little, we see them with some fears of spiders or being alone. Especially in preschoolers, we see kiddos that struggle separating from their parents. And so we're like, oh, they have separation anxiety disorder. That's not really the case because some of that is developmentally appropriate for them. And so it's important to note that these things, that average onset of when it really becomes a concern in a clinical way is really not until the kiddos are much older. Same thing for social anxiety, kind of the fears of being around others, going out and doing things, age 14, right? So it's a little bit older. That one's a little bit more appropriate than the separation anxiety and age 11. But just as a general idea to kind of help maybe some of you parents who are concerned about some of these things, just to know that some of it's normal, some of it's okay, and knowing that, oh, maybe these are just sort of some red flags and some signs of this before we really get into some things. The other one that I want to touch on is generalized anxiety disorder. In our world, we shorten that for GAD. So this is actually the criteria in our diagnostic statistical manual in our DSM. So it's an excessive anxiety and worry occurring more days than not. That means really almost every day for at least 6 months. So it's going to be persistent about a number of events or of activities. And then the next criteria is that those individuals have difficulty controlling the worry. Now, for kiddos and teens, you might not really know that they're having a hard time controlling that until we'll talk about some behaviors to notice and things to watch out for and why that's coming up. But also for children, to meet this criteria for a clinical diagnosis, those worries tend to be related to that competency or quality of performance. So that's where you're going to start to see some of that perfectionism when kids really struggle making mistakes, when they're worried about what other people think of them. And that performance piece really means not necessarily if they are, actually in a performance, but so if they're playing basketball or whatever and there's a game, it's not necessarily that performance, but it's their own personalization of that. So they feel like they've done a bad job on a quiz or homework, or they're just coloring for fun and it's not going the way that they want to. That's where that tends to be related to children in that way. And we'll talk about those things a little bit later on. I just want to give you kind of a brief overview for what that looks like. And then there's the checklist box. So associated with one or more. For adults, in order to meet this criteria, if you're age 17 or older, you actually have to be associated with 3 or more on the list, but for kiddos, it's only 1. And so it's restlessness or fatigue, keying up or feeling keyed up or on edge, being easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating, or mind going blank. And there's another one that's a tricky one, because for kiddos, that difficulty concentrating, ADHD and anxiety, they hold hands. So they're often very similar and they look similar in a lot of ways. And so sometimes it's really challenging to find the difference between the two of those. Irritability, muscle tension, sleep disturbance. We're going to talk a lot about sleep disturbance because that's one of the bigger red flags to see in all kiddos, from, you know, little bitty to 3 all the way up through high school and into college. And even in adults, that sleep disturbance is a big part. And so typically kiddos will oftentimes check the box for that one. And that's what helps them meet the criteria if they're going to be clinically diagnosed in that way. And then the last one, of course, is causing significant distress or impairment across environments. The important thing to know there is the across environments. So that distress and impairment, it can't just be at home. It can't just be at school. It can't just be when they're over at their friend's house. It can't just be the one-time thing. It has to be across the board. And so what we want to look at is across environments. And is this happening at home? Is this happening at school? Where is this happening? How often is it happening? And what kinds of things are going on when you're seeing these behaviors? And so we'll talk about some of those behaviors in a little bit. But just knowing that this is kind of the generalized anxiety disorder, tends to be the overarching umbrella for anxiety as a whole. And then we can narrow down into some of those other little niches of separation anxiety, social anxiety, OCD, things like that. And so we'll kind of talk in more of a broad general sense today so that you guys just have a better idea of what to look for with your kids. And if you're here, you're probably thinking, my kid has anxiety, right? You're probably wondering, what does this look like for my kid? And is my kid normal? Or is this something that I should be concerned about? And so we'll talk through some of those things. First, I want to talk about COVID. I hear a lot that we're COVID anxious or we're worried about going to school because of COVID. And so you'll kind of see here that I've actually listed a grief cycle instead, because what I'm noticing and what in our field of what we're noticing around COVID is not necessarily anxiety. It's more of a loss, because we've lost the things that we used to be able to do. A lot of things, you know, we can't do in the same way, or the rules have changed. Now we have to wear a mask. We have to be 6 feet apart. There's so many different things that we can't do in person in the same way. And so we're losing a lot of those connections with people. And we as humans are biologically wired to crave connections with others. And so when we don't have that, we think, oh, we're anxious. Not necessarily. If you've ever lost a pet or you've ever lost somebody, you know what this might feel like. And this is sort of where we're at right now. So that first piece is, oh my gosh, what is happening? You know, think back to March, right after spring break, it feels like, was what everything got shut down. Stay in your house, close the doors, shut the blinds, don't leave. It was kind of crazy. And now, fortunately, things have slacked up and have moved on a little bit. And so some of us and some of our kiddos are a little bit more into the acceptance phase of like, okay, this is fine. I just wear my mask. I follow the rules. It's not really a big deal. But there were probably some pieces in there where, and I know that some kids are still really struggling and being in that anger phase. And so we're just really angry and frustrated, and it's hard. And some kiddos have sort of retreated and they've gone into more of that depression detachment phase of like, I want to separate. I don't want to do this. I want to kind of hold up in my room, and I just want to pretend like nothing exists. And so you might be worrying about them in a different way. And then there's the dialogue and bargaining, you know, finding a way to figure it out. Well, for kiddos, I think we see a lot of times like, ugh, I have to wear my mask again and I don't want to. If I wear it this one time, can I not wear it this other time? And so, it's hard to figure out the rules between all of those things. And with this too, it's not always a cycle. It doesn't go particularly in from number 1 to number 2 to number 3 to number 4 to number 5 to number 6. It's sort of, I wish it wasn't a cycle, and I don't really know why they depict this as a cycle, because you can start at number 1 and maybe shift to number 5 and you're okay with it for a little bit, and then all of a sudden you're back at number 2 and you're angry all over again. And so it's really a bounce around within the circle, and not necessarily in a chronological order. And so I just want to kind of throw this out there for us to be mindful of. It's not necessarily because we're worried about it, it's because we're grieving a loss. And the loss that we're grieving is the normalcy and the connection with others. And so that's where kiddos tend to struggle. And it might look like worries. They might be telling you that they're worried about it, but shifting that mindset a little bit just to notice that they are grieving. They're grieving that loss. And in a sense, we all are in various ways. Again, you don't have to be, at number 1. Maybe you never hit number 4. Maybe you never hit bargaining. That's okay. There's not a right or wrong within this cycle, but just knowing that this is a part of it. And this is a part of the time that we're in currently. And it's going to naturally heighten our worries and heighten those senses, but also kind of letting our guard down a little bit to acknowledge that maybe we're just struggling with the loss of connection with others and the loss of activities and the loss of the things that we're used to doing. So I just wanted to touch on COVID a little bit. I know that's all in our faces all of the time. And for me in my world, in my clinical counseling world, anxiety hasn't changed much. It's there, it's prevalent. Some kiddos, it's gone up a little bit, but then it's kind of simmered back down as soon as we can acknowledge that we're just missing our normalcy. We're missing some friends, we're missing some family, we're missing traveling and doing those things. And that kind of helps ease some of that a little bit. Okay, so now let's get into kind of some symptoms here. So I'm going to go through every age. So we'll go through preschool kiddos, elementary kiddos, middle school, high school. We'll talk about behaviors and sometimes kiddos, how they internalize things and then how they externalize things. So this is a handout that I like to give to parents on anxiety. This is actually modeled after the anger iceberg. I'm sure some of you have seen the anger iceberg in the sense that it will say angry in it instead of anxiety, but it looks a little bit different. So anxiety is what's below the surface of the water. So as we know, for an iceberg and the way that it is formed, there is a piece that goes on top, but then it's actually deeply rooted underneath the water. And so the underneath the water piece of that is going to be all of those emotions. It's all of those feelings. Maybe it's not anxiety. Maybe it's just feeling overwhelmed or helpless or uncomfortable or insecure or maybe embarrassed. There's a lot of different things that could be going on that we're sort of using that word anxiety. And while I'm so thankful that there's so much awareness in that, there is some caution and some pause around the overuse of that word. It's kind of like when ADHD, I feel like, 5-10 years ago, ADHD was really, it was like, oh, we've got all of this research, all of this knowledge about it. And so now we've over-identified with ADHD. Anxiety is kind of turning into a little bit of that now, especially with COVID. And so I just want to make sure that you guys are aware that there's a lot of other feelings there that can be deeply rooted underneath that water. But what you're seeing above the water can be those meltdowns, those sleep issues, anger. For teenagers, it's that defiance, or my older elementary school kids are just refusing, refusal, having that lack of focus, being really negative about things. So those are the things that you're going to see externally on top of the behaviors, is that iceberg out of the water, because that's what you guys are seeing as parents. But underneath the water is that internal piece for kiddos. And that's really where all of those feelings are coming in, feelings of rejection, maybe not having self-worth, not feeling good enough. All of those kinds of things are really going to be beneath the surface that we need to pay attention to. So we will start with preschoolers, and this is a little text heavy. So For those of you that have little bitty kiddos, so preschoolers, for me, 2, 3, 4s, 5s, sometimes 6-year-olds, really kind of stopping at 5 here. For those little ones, here's that sleep disturbance we're going to talk about. Okay, so those little bitty guys will cry at bedtime. They don't want to sleep in their own bed. They want you to sleep with them, or they want to come sleep in your bed, or they'll come wake up a lot of times in the middle of the night and kind of crawl into your bed or crawl into the pallet on the floor next to your bed. Or, there's a lot of nightmares that are happening there, having a lot of bad dreams, things like that. So you'll notice some of those things. Again, these sleep disturbances, for it to really be truly anxiety related, would be happening probably 2, 3, 4 times a night. So it's almost a daily thing. 5 times a night, you might get 1 or 2 off nights that you're like, whoa, finally, I got some sleep tonight. My little one wasn't just up all night doing that. That's where you want to be concerned about some of those things. Separation, so struggling going to school, struggling going to home, events, activities. So even though if there's not a lot of that going on right now, that might be heightened even more of the times that you do go out, you do go to the grocery store, things like that. They just cling. So they're clinging on. That's where we come up with that separation anxiety term, right? So that's where that pops up for us. It's like, oh, we're just having a hard time separating, and so these are things to be on the lookout for, some of those things. For my little bitty guys, what you're going to see behaviorally, you're going to hear a lot about tummy aches. You're going to hear a lot about headaches. You're going to hear a lot about I'm sick to my stomach, or I feel like I'm going to throw up. Those kinds of things you're going to hear verbally. What you're going to see is a lot of, I have little bitty guys that bite their nails, or kind of pull on their shirt or pull on your shirt, or oftentimes they'll lick their lips, and you'll have that red chapped all the way around. And that is an oral fixation too. So that's a self-soothing technique that kiddos they know what to do. Their body's telling them that this is a repetitive motion. And so you'll see that around their lips. And then the shying away too, a little bit of like, I'm going to hide behind your leg. I don't want to do any of that. And so those are some sort of red flags to look for. Again, you would want to look for more check boxes on this rather than few. If you're only having struggles with, sleeping at night, that could be one issue, right? So there's a lot of different things that goes on and reasons behind kiddos' behaviors. And it's important to figure out if they're behaving in a certain way, what are they trying to tell you? All kids' behaviors are purposeful. They're trying to get something out of it, but they don't have the words to tell us. And so they're showing us with their body. And so we've got to figure out as adults, like, what is going on? And as a parent, if you're feeling inadequate or you're feeling like just at a loss for what to do, then reach out to somebody, ask for support, ask for help. That's what, you've got your resources for. So be mindful of those things. Okay, so elementary school kiddos, same idea. So sleep disturbances, multiple requests to get out of bed. You can get them back in bed, but they get back out. And you can get them back in bed, but then they get back out. Nightmares, night terrors will happen sometimes too. For elementary school kiddos, though, it's really about they struggle to fall asleep by themselves. And so they really need you to read them their stories or sing songs or read the books, rub the back, all of those things. And it feels like it takes forever. And it feels like as a parent, you cannot soothe them and console them. And it's just a struggle. So that's the difference there. Now, every family sometimes has their own routine, and, we do 3 books and you go to bed and it's no big deal, right? But then if they're asking you to come back in, or they're getting out of their bed to get a drink of water, they're always finding an excuse to get out of bed. That's kind of when you want to be like, what's going on? And that goes along with that restlessness too. So they're going to be fidgeting a lot, having a hard time sitting still, difficulty concentrating. I will caution you though, in those fidgets, difficult sitting still, concentrating, focus, that's where people will say, oh, we're ADD. We just cannot stay on track, and this is what it is. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's because of something else. There's something else going on. There's an underlying issue there that maybe they're not feeling good enough. Again, we want to think about the emotions that are tied behind that, and kind of dig a little bit deeper, go under that water and see what's going on there with those feelings. If they're real just kind of bouncing around all over the place and they can't really do that, it's something to pay attention to. The somatic symptoms, again, you'll have the tummy aches, you'll have the nausea. As they get older, you'll start to see sweaty hands. If their hands and feet are kind of sweaty and their socks are just drenched. Now, don't get me wrong, elementary school kids have some pretty stinky feet. And it might just be because they've been outside and played and are sweaty, but if it's like soaking wet, you'll want to take notice of that too. And have headaches. They'll start complaining that their heads are hurting, or that they can't. Sometimes I have kids with their heart, they'll say it feels like it's just going to jump out of me, is a way that they typically describe that racing heart feeling, if they're verbal enough to be able to say that. And that's the tricky part with elementary school kids, is by the time they get into, third, fourth, fifth grade, they're kind of like little adults. And so sometimes we treat them like little adults and we forget that they're still kiddos and they don't always have the words that make sense to us as adults. And so they're going to show with those behaviors instead. And so again, those oral fixations. So with elementary school kids, it's the same licking the lips. What they'll also do is chew on their shirt. Now, again, on that one, so everything is like, it doesn't always mean that they're anxious, right? It just means, so if they're chewing on their shirt, chewing on their pencil, it could be because they're getting molars. So around 7, 8 is when they get molars in the back and they hurt. And so they're teething all over again. So you would know that if you've been going to a dentist regularly and knowing that those things are coming up. If they're chewing on a lot of things, then that's a question for your dentist. If the molars are starting to come in, then you know that that's the reason. If those have already come in and they're chewing on stuff, then we should talk about something different. Lots of times kiddos will cry and it feels like they would cry out of nowhere, or it feels like they would be really sensitive, like, oh my gosh, my kid is just so sensitive. And they don't want to participate in things. They have a hard time taking risks or trying new things, or they will try one thing and then quit. And so they're okay doing it one time, but then they discontinue it. So those are some different things to look for those elementary kiddos. I'm going to pause here because for my younger kiddos, for my preschool kids and my elementary school kids, what is important for them is to connect their body to their feelings. And so oftentimes, I've got a lot of different activities, and this is one of them. And you guys can do this at home. If you're just having a really difficult time figuring out what in the world is going on, have your kid draw a picture. If they're this age, if they're preschoolers, even preschoolers can do this, even though their fine motor skills aren't very developed yet, they're still able to give you a sense of what that's like. And elementary school kiddos, have them draw you a picture. Okay, so what you want to do is you can like draw out a little gingerbread body looking thing and say, okay, color on this body, where does it hurt, where do you feel the worry? And then they can tell you, and they can color in the hands, or they can color in the head or the feet, or what does that look like, so that then they can better identify, okay, I'm really worried and I feel it here in my body. And now because kiddos feel in their body first, because they don't have the language for the feelings yet. They don't have the language for what's actually going on. They can only tell you, my tummy hurts, I feel sick, I just don't want to go. They can't tell you why. Don't ask them why. Don't bother, because they don't have an answer for why. Say, okay, draw me a picture. All right. And so either you can do this little gingerbread body, or just have them draw a regular picture and say, okay, draw me a picture for how you're feeling right now. And you can take a look at what kind of colors do they use. Are they red and black and dark and scary? Or are they more like, blues and yellows and purples and more happy colors? What's really going on? Is it a whole bunch of scribbles and it's all over the page? That's going to give you a clue of like, okay, we need to just sit for a second. Let's take a little bit of a break. let's just sit in some quiet, some be together, let's have a hug, something like that, and then let's move on. And so we'll talk about some of those things about of what you guys can do, but I wanted to pause here for my younger kiddos because this is really relevant for them. Okay. And then we'll get into older kiddos here. So middle school and high school kind of clumped in together. They're my tweens and teens, and they're pretty similar. So again, I talked about those sleep disturbances. For my teenagers, it's really having a hard time falling asleep and staying asleep. You'll never know because they're older and they'll just kind of figure it out on their own, but you'll notice every morning that they're tired and they're sluggish, and it's like, hey, did you sleep last night? And they'll probably tell you no. And if that's recurring, kind of pay attention to that. Sort of track how many times is that happening? Is there a pattern to what's going on for them? If middle schoolers and high schoolers are having nightmares, we've got a problem. By the time they get to that age and those teenagers and they're waking up and having some severe nightmares, we need to talk about those things, and we need to figure out what's happening in those nightmares, because those nightmares are going to be related to whatever they're worried about, whatever their level of discomfort is going to show up overnight. So our research tells us, and we know that our brains do most of our processing while we're sleeping. And so when we are sleeping, you have those dreams. Now, whether you remember them or not, it's irrelevant. But if kiddos are waking up and can vividly remember those nightmares, something else is going on, and we need to address those things that are going on. And they might not even be aware that they're happening, but if that's a frequent occurrence for them, we need to have a discussion. And then for these older kiddos, we want to really look at their cognitive functioning. So if they have those really excessive and intrusive thoughts over and over and over again about I'm not worthy, or I'm not doing well enough, or I made a 98 instead of a 100. Those are things, and it's a recurring thing. If they're really visibly upset about it, those are things that are red flags there. Difficulty controlling those. So if they're having those thoughts and then they're repeating and we can't get them into some sort of manageable state, that's again where we want to do that. Concentration. So we've talked about the comorbidity of ADHD and anxiety. They go hand in hand. And so it's not necessarily that they struggle with that attention or hyperactivity. That has a different set of criteria. That's a whole nother topic for another day, of comparing anxiety and ADHD together and noticing what symptoms are different and how can you tell the difference between anxiety and ADHD. And sometimes that you have both, that comorbidity, they exist together. That's a whole nother, I could do a whole nother 1 hour thing on just that. But that concentration piece, because it comes along with anxiety, and it pops up with anxiety because of those thoughts that happen above. So it's, oh my gosh, I'm going to fail this test. I'm worried I'm going to fail this test, and then I just don't complete the test. Like, well, how did you only get halfway through the test when you've studied and prepared and done all of this? So you'll see things that don't make sense, especially for kids in school. You'll see a lot of those things and those differences there. You probably won't notice much of that at home because they will be keeping it to themselves, most likely. They won't be sharing that with you. The somatic symptoms you will see at home. If they're hyperventilating, or they're breathing really quickly, or they're getting tired easily. So that's, and I say getting tired easily, and sometimes that's correlated with depression. So again, a whole nother topic. We're not going to touch on that today. And like, oh, they just sleep a lot. They're really tired all of the time. Those things tend to be correlated with, if they're sleeping all the time, staying in their room all the time, not going out, getting tired easily, we might want to shift gears and look at depression. In anxiety, the fatigue looks a little bit different. So the fatigue sometimes can be little short spurts of fatigue. So it's like kiddos can go, and then they crash, and then they can go, and then they can crash, because they've learned how to, at this age, they've learned how to tolerate just enough, and then there's nothing left, and then they get burnt out. And so, and that can be a repetitive thing there also. Behaviors, again, for my teens, they will also cry unexpectedly. It just feels like it comes out of nowhere, like where does this came unprompted. And it happens again. We want to look at that frequency. So if it's happening, 3 or 4 times a week, let's talk. But if it's not, if it's just a one-off once a month, kind of thing, then, it's something to consider there. For anxious kiddos, they tend to avoid. Also, they will quit doing things that they used to be good at, and typically that's tied to that self-esteem. If they're doing that, it means that they are feeling like they're not good enough, and that's typically where this shows up and comes up for them. And so we want to make sure we are tending to those, again, that iceberg down there at the bottom for them, and those feelings, we want to make sure we're tending to those things. So ways to support your kiddo, regardless of their age, routines and structure. It doesn't matter how old they are, that routine and structure for them is so important, and they thrive on it. That way they know, and that's important because they know what to expect. They know what is coming next, and that helps them prepare for what's coming up, and they can feel like they can manage that. The feelings, acknowledging those feelings, that goes back to that iceberg there. So if your kid comes home and tells you a story and, my friend did this and so did that, and I didn't do this, and, instead of focusing on the content of what's being said, focus on the way that your child is saying it. How are they saying it? What kind of emotion is coming up when they say that? Is it real nonchalant, like they don't care, it's fine, no big deal? Or is it like, oh, it sort of seems like that hurt your feelings a little bit, right? Like, oh, that sort of bothered you. Acknowledge those things. Tell them that you see and you hear their feelings. It doesn't matter how old they are. They could be 17, 16 and driving and, doing their own thing and pretty independent. But when they come home and share with you, they want you to hear them and to see them and so that they feel heard and understood. And the way to do that, especially with teens, is to acknowledge those feelings and say, man, it sounds like you had a pretty rough day. And if they're a little bitty kiddo, it's like, oh, it sounds like you got your feelings hurt today. So you want to use age appropriate language too. For those little bitty guys, you want to use sad and mad and scared, your basic sort of feelings. When they're a lot older, you want to get really into like, oh, that was embarrassing, right? Like they can tolerate, and they need to know how to identify those feelings. And it's important to not fix it and so telling your kid not to worry totally invalidates them. If you say like, oh, it's okay, don't worry, we feel like we're comforting them, right? Like, oh yeah, that's making it way better. It's not. I have bad news. It's making it worse because they feel like how they're feeling isn't true. And that's never the message that we want to send for kiddos. The message that we want to send to kiddos is their feelings are always 100% of the time valid. Whether it's rational or not, it doesn't matter, because in the child's world and the child's experience, it is real and it is a thing that they're experiencing, and we need to validate that feeling and then help them manage it, help them know that it's not really a realistic thing, right? Like Godzilla is not real. I know you're scared of Godzilla, but Godzilla is so not real. He can't come and hurt you, right? Like that's not a thing that's going to happen. But if we don't tend to some of those feelings first, they'll never move on and never get past it. So really pay attention. If your one takeaway here is to acknowledge those feelings, I would be so proud. I would be so happy, because that's like big. I should have like big bolded that. That is foundation block number 1. And then building off of that, if we can't identify and acknowledge those feelings, anything else we do after that is going to be useless. And so by acknowledging those feelings, then we can go into giving choices and saying like, oh, I know you're really scared. I know you're really worried, but I'm not for running away from. You can choose. So giving them choices, you can choose to stand right here next to me, or you can choose to hold my hand. Which do you choose, right? So setting those limits, that's obviously a very young child example there. And it goes the same for older kiddos. You're just going to say it in a different way. For some of my kids, I do give them if it's a lot, if they're really having excessive worries about literally everything and it's exhausting, I'll help parents create a worry time. And so we set aside a timer literally and say, okay, you've got 5 minutes to tell me all of your worries. And if they try to tell you earlier during the day, like, nope, we're going to save that for worry time. And so you can schedule a time, again, going back to those routine instructors, schedule a time where you can say, all right, now I'm here to hear all of your worries. And your job would just be to listen and acknowledge those feelings. Your job is not to fix it. Your job is not to make it go away, because it won't. It will over time. That's the goal. And that's where that feelings piece comes back into play. By giving them the language for that and giving them the words, then they can know how to manage it. But if they don't know what to call it, you're out of luck. And so sometimes in that worry time, we'll create a worry box. So like get a little shoebox. For my older kids, some of my middle school crafty kids really like to create it. We'll create a box, and then at night they've got a pad of sticky notes, and they can just write down what it is that's worrying them, throw it in the box, and then the next morning or the next night they can go through their box and say like, oh, nope, I solved that one. Let's throw that one in the trash. Or yeah, I'm still worried about that one. I'm going to leave it in. Or I'm going to write another sticky note because I'm worrying it about that much. And helping them contain. That's the thing for older kiddos. It's helping them contain it so it's just not spilling out everywhere, that there's a time and a place for that. And for, my high school kids, we really journal a lot. And that could be journaling with words. That could be journaling with drawing, doodling, whatever it is, of just getting that out of the brain. And so that's what helps kiddos process through those things, is not keeping it internally. We want to move it to the external piece so they know how to communicate that with their parents. So then you as parents know what to do. It's like, oh, thanks for sharing that with me. Now I can help you. For my younger kiddos, and even for my older kiddos, respecting the kiddos' boundaries. If the child says no, they don't want to do something, respect that. The more you push them into doing something that they're not ready to do, the more they will resent you, and it will come back as they're a teenager, where they won't have a relationship with you because they won't trust you. They won't trust that you're there to keep them safe. And that's the bigger goal there, is to help them feel a sense of safety. Now, there's some times where you can say like, I know, validating those feelings. I know you really don't want to go, but maybe we can try just this one time. Okay, get them on board. If they had fun, great, awesome. It happens the next time and they're like, nope, I don't want to go. You say, oh, I know you really don't want to go. It was really scary, but I remember last time it seemed like you had a lot of fun. Maybe we can try it one more time. Okay, so giving them the option. But if they're really pushing back and saying no, especially if they're younger, I would encourage you to not. If they're not speaking to somebody, if they're not being respectful and saying hello and saying goodbye, it's okay. It's going to be okay. We talked about choices. Encouragement is kind of that same piece of like, I think you can do it. I know that you can do it. I know you're brave. I know it's really scary, but I know that that's something that you can do. So giving them that encouragement, and just finally, like, just be present, just be there for them, and sometimes it's not about saying anything. Sometimes it's just about sitting, letting them cry, letting them lean on your shoulder, especially as they're teenagers. If they're crying with you, soak it up. Soak it up that they're just there, and that your job is to just give them that warm embrace and say, I'm here. I love you no matter what. We'll work through it together. Okay. And then if you feel like all of these things, all of this is way out of your control and you're feeling at a total loss and you're all discombobulated, like this is more than I know what to do with, then seek professional help, right? You've got your school counselors there you can utilize. There's a lot of other great practices in the area as well, that maybe going and doing that would be helpful for you guys. So just keep all of those things in mind. This one right here is a lot, okay, but I wanted to show it up here. There's a lot of different ways to help kiddos kind of relax and calm down, regardless of age. There's some things that are geared for like little bitty kids and some that are geared for older. The most important thing about this is that the things that are on this list, like chewing gum, great for teenagers. They love it. It's awesome. Going for a walk is great for teenagers, little bitty kiddos. If you can get a big old fat straw and have like a milkshake where it's hard for them to intake that, they're using these muscles here. So all of these things here, they really play off of those proprioceptive, that input there. And that's really That's really an occupational therapist technique that I learned many years ago. And that's what they work on with kiddos. And feeling what that means is for them to feel the sensations of their muscles. And so by chewing that gum, you're really biting down and you can feel that clench there, right? So when you're chewing that gum, you're getting that deep sensory input. Same for going on a swing. It's that vestibular motion going back and forth. Some kiddos really love to swing because it's regulatory. It's that same repetitive motion back and forth. Same thing for playing basketball, shooting some hoops, throwing a football back and forth. All of those things are actually really helpful. If they're out of control, you're like, hey, let's go throw a ball. Let's throw a tennis ball against the wall. Let's play some wall ball. You know, what is it that you can do? Get their brain out of all of the mess and the chaos that's in there and get them that regulatory path back and forth so that then you can have a conversation. Then you can focus what's going on, and that helps regulate the body and gets it sort of back in sync. And so for kiddos to be able to feel those things and connecting those muscle tissues back together that's wired up to our brain. Those things are all connected in together. And so these are some good ways for you guys to kind of, you know, you can pause, take a snapshot of the screen or whatever. That you've got a lot of tools here to help kiddos do that. Jumping on a trampoline is another great one. Going for a swim, although it's a little too cold for that now, isn't it? So these are some good tools for you guys to use. Books, winding down here to just kind of some other resources. So Little Worm, a story about worry, is for little bitty kiddos, 3 to maybe 7 probably. Jonathan James and the What If Monster is a book for kiddos maybe 7 to 10. I've actually read that book with some teenagers and they were like, whoa, that's totally me, even though it's geared more towards those elementary school kids, excuse me. No Worries is an activity book. There's a whole series of them. So there's No Worries, Be Brave. There's 4 of them actually. I like the No Worries one. It's great for a little bit of all ages. Your high school kids are probably going to look at you like you're dumb. So maybe don't do that for them, but it's a good resource for elementary school kids. Some middle school kids really like it and can kind of work through it. And then What to Do When You Worry Too Much. That one is for older kids. It is an activity book. The things with the activity books, though, I will caution you, you have to do, if you're going to do some of these things at home, you have to do them together. Don't just hand them off to your kid and be like, work on this. You need to make it an intentional time to say, hey, let's go through 3 pages of this book together. Do it once a week, whatever, when you set your time down. Like, I've noticed you had a lot of worries lately. Let's pick 3 pages out of this book we can do, or 2 pages, or, you know, whatever, and kind of go through it a little bit at a time. Don't leave them to their own devices on this because it won't be helpful. Same thing with the younger books. Those are stories to read them together. Some kids like to read them over and over again because they really relate and identify to them. Books for you guys as parents. Okay, so anxiety is really related to usually kiddos that we see that are anxious are because they have a parent that is anxious. So I oftentimes recommend anxious kids, anxious parents, and recognizing, when do you as an adult feel anxious? When do you feel worried about doing chores? I mean, basic things, right? So it comes up in us in a lot of different ways. But noticing when you are in that moment, the book talks about, for noticing you as an adult, what does that look like, and how you're modeling something for your kiddos, and you might not even be aware of it. And so that's a really great resource. It's very practical. It gives you kind of homework to work on. And that's a really great resource. If you feel like, oh yeah, I'm totally anxious, then that's a great resource for you. How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk. This is one of my absolute favorite books. This has been around forever. It's pretty silly, cartoony. It's a super duper easy read. It does have some homework in there for you, some activities. If you're one who likes to sort of be told what to do and check the boxes and say, yes, I have done this, and yes, I have practiced this, and you're really invested in it. This one is great because it does, and it works. It tells you how to talk to your kiddos so that they will talk back to you, and how to listen too. Okay, so that's the more important piece, is how to listen to them so they'll talk to you, and how to talk so they'll, I mean, It's pretty self-explanatory for the title. What I love about this book is there's 3 of them. So this is the one for elementary school kiddos. They have a younger version. They have a How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen, and that's ages 2 to about 6. That one's a really great. That one also touches on a lot of those issues. Toilet training, it'll touch on that. Brushing teeth, it'll touch on that for those little bitty kids and doing some of those daily life skill tasks. And then there is another one for teens. So How to Talk So Teens Will Listen. It's a great book. It's a great resource. Some parents really love it. Most of my parents actually like this brainstorm book better. So it's definitely more research based. If you're a big reader, Brainstorm by Dan Siegel is another one of my favorites for teens. It's the power and purpose of the teenage brain. So when we're feeling like our teenager is super angsty and is talking back and is making a lot of poor choices, this is the book for you. This is the book that will help you better understand why they're doing what they're doing and what to do about it. So when they're having reckless behaviors and doing a lot of risky things, experimenting with a lot of different things, this is the book that will help you figure some of those things out. And then Freeing Your Child from Anxiety, just another great little book for all kiddos. If it's a really, really big struggle, oops, sorry. I went too fast there. If your kiddo has really struggles with anxiety, this is a good, easy read just to kind of better understand what's going on. It's another one of my favorite books there to kind of pass on. These are just a few resources. I have loads and loads of other resources that are listed on, and books and different videos and things like that are listed on my website on my resource page. So typically I would kind of stop here and ask for questions. And so I will just say here that if you do have questions or there's something you just kind of want to figure out, like, is this normal? Is this not normal? Specifically about your kid, feel free to contact me. So here's my contact information. You can email me. You can call me. Our website is free-spacecounseling.com. That's where you'll find that resource page. And so I welcome any kind of questions you guys may have. And then I can help you go from there. If you're looking for maybe a counselor in your area, I know my practice is in Plano. It's in West Plano, right by the Shops at Willow Bend off of Plano. It's right at the tollway, and George Bush really is where it's at, right there. And so if that's not too far for you, you feel like you want to come in and work with, I've got a group practice here with several other different counselors that you could work with, or if you're just needing some additional resources, if maybe somebody who's closer to you and you're really looking for that, I can provide you with some of those referrals as well. But do call me, send me an email if you've got something on your mind. I'm happy to chat with you for just a few minutes and be a support for you in that way. So you just let me know what you guys need. And I think that's the end of what I've got.